Welcome to another 2D10 character creation tutorial. This week, we're taking a departure from the world of darkness to help you make a character in the game that started it all. That's right, today we are going to make a character for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This character creation tutorial is going to be quite different from any other tutorial I've made so far for just a few reasons. First, Dungeons & Dragons is a much more stats-based RPG. While roleplay is always important in an RPG, it's in the name after all, the story of your character will often take a backseat to your role in your party. Second, Dungeons & Dragons isn't a horror game necessarily, but a game of high fantasy. Now, this is not to state that you can't tell horror stories or suspense stories or mysteries or whatever in D&D, but the primary focus of the game is high fantasy. Magic, swords, swashbuckling, and adventure are the bread and butter of D&D. So, you've never played D&D before, huh? Well, it turns out the 5th edition of the game is pretty painless to get started, and it's probably the easiest tabletop RPG to find a group of players for, because it's the most popular tabletop game on the market. Anyways, we don't really need to spend much time praising the virtues of D&D. I just did a 3-part history if you want to go and check out those videos when you're done with this one, and it's an almost 50-year-old game with millions of fans. Okay, so you find yourself a group of players and a DM looking to run a game of D&D. What do you need now to make your character? Well, like most games, you need an imagination, but that can't be purchased at a hobby shop, he said jokingly. Well, first, you should get yourself a copy of the D&D Player's Handbook. This is the handbook for the 5th edition, but it's not going to explicitly state that anywhere on the cover. Basically, if you're at a Barnes & Noble or a local game store, this is likely the book you'll find first. Next, get yourself a character sheet. There's one in the back of the book that you could copy, or you could go to dnd.wizards.com/character sheets, link down below, to print several variants. Also, you can edit them right on your computer, which is what I did in this tutorial. There's also a ton of different character building programs out there that can help you build your character without the need of a tutorial like this one, but those are the subject of future videos, maybe. Your dungeon master might have other sheets or programs to use as well, so check with them before you begin. Next, and this is optional depending on the system you follow for character creation, is dice. When you make a D&D character, you can roll dice for your stats or use a system of points assignment. I prefer to go with chance. When I make a D&D character, I always roll my stats. It's just something that's a holdover from when I started when I was like 12 years old. So if you're going to be playing at a table with other people, get yourself a set of polyhedral dice. Otherwise, find an app you can use to roll dice as well. You can buy polyhedral dice at most game stores, you can buy them at most bookstores, or you can get them online at several retailers. They're relatively inexpensive, and there's a whole market dedicated to cool dice. For character creation, you'll need 4 6-sided dice. Finally, get yourself a pen or pencil and some scratch paper for notes. Like most tabletop RPGs, there's tons of supplements for D&D, some of which might have additional stuff that you can use in your game. I'll only be using the Player's Handbook to make this character though. Also, a word on the authenticity of this video. Since I have to write and edit these tutorials, I have to determine the character stats in advance. Now, I know that this peek into the world of production is going to crush your soul, but soon you'll be so jaded you just won't care. Until then, just pretend. Okay, let's get down to business. As you may know, I strongly believe in creating the story for your character before you ever even think about stats. D&D also espouses this, albeit in a different sort of way than a storytelling game does. D&D is a game where adventuring and your character's role in the party are just as important as the characteristics of your character. If you peek at page 8 of the Player's Handbook, the 3 pillars of adventure will explain more. For folks joining me from a World of Darkness / storytelling game background, this is not to say that you can't tell very compelling stories in the D&D multiverse. In fact, some of the most exciting and breathtaking stories take place in worlds of high fantasy. If you turn to page 11, you'll find a step-by-step character creation walkthrough. I'll use this as the basis to make my character with you. Think about your favorite fantasy movie, book series, or TV show. What are some of your favorite characters, and what are they known for? Are they a heroic human ranger, A tough and gruff dwarf with a battle axe? Or an erudite wizard striving to unlock the secrets of the universe? Well, I want to play a hardened yet compassionate cleric. My character should be able to smite evil and strike down the undead, but also lend aid to heal the sick and dying. He is devout to his god, but is more than just a simple priest. He is blessed with the touch of his god, chosen to act as his god's will on the material plane. Marcus Trueoath, human, was born in a frostbitten northern kingdom. His homelands were civilized, but were on the edge of a great, frigid expanse. His culture revered a god of justice and war, and built their society on a standard of virtue and equality. As Marcus grew into maturity, he felt the call of his patron, urging him to the temple. He grew up swinging a hammer and wearing armor, as was the way of his people. But one morning while in prayer to Tyr, he felt the touch and breath of the deity, urging him beyond simple priesthood. It was in this message that Marcus knew he must leave his great northern home and spread the name of Tyr and his justice far and wide. With little direction, Marcus Trueoath would march south, looking to bring divine wrath to those who would serve injustice and evil. Along the way, Marcus met the various personalities that make up his party. He's stern yet tolerant. He is trained in the ways of war, but knows the value of peace. He is charitable and believes that his God will guide him to that which he needs the most to survive. He sees himself as a protector of the common people, but is suspicious of overly friendly strangers with grandiose offers. Great, we have a general idea of the character and a simple yet playable background. We know what class we want to play, what race we want to play, and we can assume a bunch of things that we'll get into as we make the character. Alright, my brand new nerds, let's take just a few minutes to explain the sheet and talk about the numbers we're going to run on it and where those numbers come from and what they're actually used for. Now, I don't want to take for granted that any of you know this information before we start. So, at the top of the page, we have a space for character name, class, and level, background, player name, race, alignment, and experience points. These are all things that we're going to discuss as we get into the tutorial, save for experience points. Experience points are accumulated through gameplay, depending on how your DM wants to dole them out to your party. As you gain XP, you grow in strength. Get enough, gain levels. Now let's look at the far left of the sheet. Here, these are your abilities. There are two spaces in each of these boxes, one for ability scores and one for ability score modifier. Ability scores are either generated randomly or taken from a predetermined set of numbers. So let's just assume we're rolling. When I roll my stats, I'm rolling for the ability score. I take that score, add any adjustments I get for my race, and place the new ability score in the box. When I place the ability score in the large box, I will then add the corresponding ability score modifier, found on page 13, to the small space below. Both numbers can change during gameplay, so it's important to keep in mind how your ability score impacts your ability score modifier. These two numbers are virtually always tied to one another. Ability score modifiers are directly used for skills and saving throws located to the right of your ability scores. Here, inspiration is a bonus your DM can give you throughout the game. Generally, it's given as a reward for good role-playing, in really embodying the character that you've made. You can use that inspiration in a tight spot, rewarding other players with it at the table, and more. You don't start with inspiration, you gain it during play. Next, proficiency bonus. Your proficiency bonus is a number you get to add to certain skills, saving throws, and attacks, which is determined by your level. Anything you have a proficiency in, you get to add this bonus. The proficiency bonus only increases every 4 levels, so Marcus's will be +2 until level 5. Next, saving throws. When your character is forced to resist something like falling, poison, traps, or other similar obstacles, your DM will call for you to make a save. As you can see, there are 6 types of saves, all corresponding to your abilities. Depending on your class, you're going to have saving throw proficiencies. For the cleric, I'm proficient in wisdom and charisma. So I fill in my little dots for wisdom and charisma, and I can now add my proficiency modifier to those scores. Write your new total in the space. To make a saving throw, you roll your trusty d20, take the result of that roll, and add the number next to your saving throw modifier. Skills, just below, operate in a similar manner. For instance, take a look at acrobatics. You'll note that it has dex next to it on the right. That means the skill is dexterity based. You roll d20 and you add your dexterity modifier to the number. Again, if you're proficient with the skill as determined by your class, fill in the little circle and add your proficiency modifier to the score. For a cleric with wisdom as one of my higher scores, it might be smart for me to take a proficiency in, say, insight or medicine. Those are all determined by my class. Look at your class and see what features you get with it. Next, let's hit the middle of the character sheet. On top, we have armor class, initiative, and speed. Armor class is determined by the armor your character wears and typically your dexterity modifier. Each armor type grants a bonus. Look on page 145. Some armors don't allow your dex modifier to be added, and those are generally heavier armor types. Initiative. That's just your dex modifier. Initiative is used to determine the order of actions in combat. Roll a d20, add the number in your initiative box. Simple as that. Also, be aware, many of these things are modified by special features of your class. That's why you want to add these numbers to your sheet and do the math ahead of time. Speed is determined by your race. Also, things like armor, spells, etc. can affect your speed. Below, you have hit points boxes. The top box is for your character's current hit points as indicated. The HP maximum should be an indication of your character's maximum amount of hit points if fully healed. Below that is a box marked temporary hit points. That space is for temporary hit points. Some class features, spells, and effects can boost or lower hit points temporarily. Next, hit dice and total. Mark your hit dice here. Clerics receive a d8, and being level 1, I have 1 hit dice. Finally, we have attacks and spellcasting. This is so you can keep track of your normal attacks with weapons or spells. Your attack bonus. For this weapon, add the strength modifier plus your proficiency bonus. If you're proficient with the weapon, make sure to look at the weapon type to determine what ability it uses. Melee weapons typically use strength, and projectile weapons use dexterity. Mark down the damage for the weapon, plus any bonus you receive to damage, like strength or dexterity. Finally, on the left under your abilities, we have passive wisdom, perception. It's your character's wisdom modifier. That's it. Okay, let's get back to the show. First thing, let's mark down our character's name, race, class, and level. For this character, we're starting at level 1. Marcus is a human. Details about the benefits of being human start on page 29. As in many fantasy games with multiple races, humans tend to be the most varied of the races. A jack of all trades of the humanoids. There's also a list of various human ethnicities with examples of names and some cultural information listed on page 30 and 31. Chat with your DM to find out what setting your group is playing in and what's available to you. For instance, in my home game, everything's open and available. Who knows what we'll encounter during play. Now, I'll mark down my natural benefits for being human. First, all my ability scores are increased by 1. This will come in handy in just a minute. Second, my alignment can be anything, and I'll come back to this later. Third, my speed is 30, so go ahead and mark that on your sheet in the space marked speed. My character can speak, read, and write the common tongue. What's the common tongue? Well, it's a fantasy language that stands in for English, basically, so get with the program. It's whatever language you speak. I also have another language of my choice, which I'll choose later. Check out some of the other races listed in Chapter 2. You can play elves, dwarves, halflings, dragonborn, and more. Next, I'm going to choose my class. You know from my background that Marcus is a cleric. In most standard games of D&D, your character will start at level 1. This is the level that I'm going to go with for Marcus as well. On page 45, you'll find a helpful chart that describes the classes and some of their essential stats. For the cleric, I want to make sure that my primary stat is in wisdom. By glancing at my saving throw proficiencies, charisma might also be somewhat important. I'm not sure yet. Let's jump to page 56 and look at some of the things that are included with my class. At first level, my proficiency bonus is +2. I'll mark that down on the top left of my sheet. It may be on a different spot for you depending on your sheet, but the space should say proficiency bonus. A list of these is on page 12, but I'll pop them up on the screen now so that I don't have to read them to you. Whoa. For my hit points or HP, I get 1d8 per level. That means every level I can take one 8-sided dice and roll it. Plus, I get to add my Constitution modifier to that roll. Right now, on the top middle third of my sheet, I'll note D8 in the hit dice box. I don't know my actual HP yet because I haven't determined my stats yet. However, because I'm level 1, I have 1 hit dice. Mark that under total. I'm also going to mark down my proficiencies for my own reference under other proficiencies in languages at the bottom left of the sheet. It doesn't really matter where you mark things, so long as you know and can reference your character stats. Lots of people just write everything down in a spiral notebook or on an Excel spreadsheet. Just do what makes sense for you. On page 57 on the lower right, there's also a list of equipment your character starts with, provided your character's a cleric. Feel free to mark that stuff down on your sheet under equipment. It can often be important to know exactly what your character has on their body depending on your dungeon master and the campaign that you're involved in. Okay, cool. We've picked our class and marked it down. Now, let's move on to the next step. We'll finish up the class-specific stuff a little later. Let's roll some dice, shall we? At least that's what I'll be doing. If you don't want to press your luck with the dice, you can use the standard set of scores, which are 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8. You can assign these in any order you like. What I'll do is I'll roll 4 6-sided dice, or 4d6, and drop the lowest of the 4. Then I'll add up the remaining 3 and write down that total. Let's look at my dice rolls and see what I got. First, 16. Nice. Next, 10. Not bad, pretty middle of the road. 13. Cool. 8. Ish. Well, I guess you get an 8 with the standard scores too. 18. Nice. The best we could get on a roll. And lastly, 13. All in all, I'd say these are some pretty solid stats. Next, let's write these stats on our sheet in the order we wish to place them. However, don't write them in the box yet, as we still need to apply our racial adjustments. For Marcus the Cleric, Wisdom should be the highest stat. Let's write 18 next to Wisdom. Next, because a Cleric often has to get down and dirty in combat, the next most important stats should be Strength or Constitution. Alright, let's pause here for one quick minute. I understand the strategy of making a character according to class to fit the parameters and needs of a party. However, as you may know if you've watched any of my other tutorial videos or basically anything I've ever done, I prefer story over stats 10 times out of 10. So while I'll show you how to build this character according to the book's suggestion, know that it's perfectly acceptable to put your stats wherever you want based on the character you want to play. Do you think that your cleric would be more charismatic than they would be strong? Throw your points there instead. Make the character you want to play, not just the tank or healer your party expects you to make. Entertaining characters are different. They're dynamic and they're flawed. You'll have tons of potential for fun, memorable gameplay outside of the dice rolls if you buck tradition here and there. Try it out. After all, this is a role-playing game, not an MMO. So I want Marcus to be a bit more tough. I'm going to put 16 next to Constitution. Next, 13 to Strength and Dexterity. Combat's going to be important for Marcus, and these stats will help bring him along. I'm going to put 10 in Intelligence because Marcus is average. Finally, I put 8 in Marcus's Charisma, even if it makes me cringe to think of a religious man with crap charisma. As a human, each of these stats gets a blanket +1. Let's adjust them, mark them down, and mark our ability modifiers down as well. Page 13 has a table with the scores and their corresponding modifiers. Alright, let's jump to Chapter 4 and work on the personality and background of our character. You know, the important stuff. In this part of the character creation, you can randomly determine height, weight, gender, physical traits, etc. Also, you'll want to pick your alignment. There are 9 distinct alignments that identify morality and describe attitude towards society and order. Marcus is neutral good. Give the alignments a read and determine what works best for your character and your party. Since Marcus is a cleric to the god of Tyr, he holds justice in higher esteem than law and order. You can pick your additional languages now as well. I'm going to pick Elvish simply because I assume I'll encounter elves during gameplay. It's a pretty good story, huh? Anyways, let's look at backgrounds. Backgrounds help you determine where your character came from, offer suggestions for roleplay, and story cues for your game. Easy enough, Marcus's background is that of Acolyte, the first listed on page 127. The Acolyte has spent their life in the service to a god or gods. As I explained in my background, Marcus devoted himself to the god Tyr. Look at the tables on the right of the page of the background you've picked. You can roll dice to determine your character's traits, but I'll just pick from the list. Under personality traits, I'll choose number 6, tolerant of other faiths. Under ideals, I'll pick 2, charity. Under bonds, I pick 4, everything that Marcus does, he does for the common people. And finally, in flaws, I'll pick number 6. Marcus becomes obsessed with goals to the point that they become a detriment to everything else in his life. The background you pick also helps determine your starting equipment. Additionally, you could roll dice to determine your starting gold and buy your equipment a la carte. On page 143, each class has a starting wealth roll. I'm going to just take what's included in my class and background, but do whatever works for you. I'm going to start with taking the Warhammer, since I'm proficient with it. Scale Mail, which has an AC of 14, plus I get to add my dex bonus to that. A light crossbow and 20 bolts. Explorer's Pack, because I'm an explorer. And a shield, which adds 2 to my AC, and finally a holy symbol. Plus, I get all that stuff from being an acolyte, which is also a lot of the things that are in the priest pack, so go take a look at that. Now let's figure out some stat-specific stuff now. My total hit points for level 1 is 11. That's the full D8 plus 3 from my Constitution modifier. Don't forget to mark down your ability and saving throw proficiencies. For Marcus, Wisdom and Charisma are his proficient saving throws. I'll mark down all those adjusted numbers. Next, Marcus gets some skill proficiencies as well. These are also determined by class. I'll pick Insight and Medicine and add my proficiency bonus to my ability modifier. Now for all the other spaces, I'll just mark down my ability modifier next to the skill. Marcus's armor class is a combination of the dexterity modifier, 2, plus the armor's AC, 14, plus the shield, 2. Making the AC under normal circumstances 18. Weapons are noted under attacks and spellcasting. I have a warhammer and a hand crossbow and proficiency with both. Attack bonus with the hammer is 4. 2 for my proficiency bonus and 2 for my strength modifier. Damage is 1d8 plus 2 from my strength modifier. Attack bonus with the crossbow is the same, but it uses dexterity. Damage is 1d6 plus 2 from my dex as well. And that's about it. Don't forget to mark down any additional spells you might have and be sure to communicate with your group so that you can all function together properly in your future quests. Now, I didn't go over spells here, and that's a whole video unto itself. What game would you like me to do a tutorial for next? Leave me a comment down below with some suggestions. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.